Well, welcome everyone. This is Platform Building for Self-Publishing Authors. This is part of the Authors Guild Launchpad series, which provides resources on marketing, publicity, book promotion for new books. Some of the resources are members only, but we're happy to provide this and many other programming free to the public. Thanks to Authors Guild members and everyone else joining us today for this. This is also a great collaboration with our friends at the Alliance of Independent Publishers, a global membership association for self-publishing authors. They're a nonprofit. Their mission is ethics and excellence in self-publishing, and really happy to know them and the Authors Guild and ALLi are happy to be working on a variety of things moving forward. With that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator today, the wonderful Jane Friedman. Jane, thank you so much for being here, and I'll let you all get to it. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you, Johnny. So this first panel is going to discuss platform. And I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what platform is. This is the thing that gives you visibility to your readership. It's the way that you typically reach them directly. This could be through your website, through your email newsletter, even social media, even though you don't necessarily own that entirely, and other methods. So we're not talking about paid efforts today. That's going to come next week on the second panel that we're all doing together. So if you're, for example, if you're interested in advertising, we'll talk about that next week. So platform is something of a holy grail for authors, at least in my opinion, because the more readers you can reach directly, especially online, typically the easier it is to sell books and the less you have to advertise or pay for visibility. But this is also a long game. You know, you don't build a platform overnight. And so this panel, we're going to be talking about how to get those pieces on the board, how to arrange the board so we have the most advantageous setup for growing our platform. Now, keep in mind, this, I'll get up on my soapbox for a moment, that no two authors build platform in the same way. And there's a lot of leeway here to choose the tools that work best for you. That's what makes this topic such a rich area for discussion. And it's also challenging because we can't necessarily give you a checklist. And too often people will get caught up in tactics or what's new and popular, rather than what's really going to be consistent and sustainable for their own career. So we're here to share best practices and ideas, things to consider as you make your own unique choices. There are no rules here. At least I don't think so. Matty and Michael may have some rules they want to dispense. We'll see. So I'm going to start with Michael, and then we'll go to Matty. Would you just share a little bit of your background, especially what you write and publish and how long you've been writing and publishing? Michael.
Sure. So yeah, absolutely, Jane. Thank you for having me. Thanks, Johnny and the Authors Guild for having us. We're delighted at ALLi to be doing this webinar. So my name is Michael Ronn. I am the author of over 100 books of science fiction, fantasy, and self-help books for writers. I write a lot. That's just what I do. It's my middle name, and I'm a little unusual in that I've built a writing career that has I've built a writing career while raising a family, attending law school, and raising working a full-time job in the insurance industry. So I very much understand what it means to be a part-time writer because that's my life. And I'm also at ALLi, the Alliance of Independent Authors outreach manager. So responsible for spreading the good word about ALLi, letting people know about all the great services that we have as an organization, and certainly happy to talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation.
Great. Matty?
I am Matty Dalrymple. I write the Ann Kinnear Suspense Novels and suspense shorts in the Lizzy Ballard Thrillers. I started publishing in 2013, and I also have a nonfiction platform called the Indy Author, Indy with a Y, I-N-D-Y, and have written 2 nonfiction books under the Indy Author auspices, and left my corporate job in 2019. So I'm bringing the perspective of someone who is now full-time as an author, publisher, and podcaster.
Terrific. Okay, so we're going to dive right in with the first question, and Michael will answer this one first. I want to start off by talking about brand new authors or people who are really, in the first stages of developing a platform. They don't necessarily have an online presence already. Can you talk about some of the first steps that you think they should take to get started? What would take top priority, especially if you're going to be self-publishing?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you what I did, and I'll tell you what I would do now, because I've been doing this since 2014, and honestly, it hasn't changed a lot. I made some, I think, critical mistakes that I should have probably not made. So what I did is I really focused on all the wrong things. So I was focused. I tried to, I tried to do all sorts of crazy things. I wrote as many different types of books as I could. I didn't really understand the market. I didn't really understand what it meant to put your best foot forward. I didn't know because there weren't a lot of tools back in 2014. We have so many more tools now and so much more information now to be successful out of the gate as a self-published writer that we just didn't have in 2014. So, if anybody wants to buy me a coffee, I'll tell you the exact weird mistakes that I made But what I would do now, with all the wisdom that I have now, if you could call it that, is I would, one, build a website, but we'll talk about that later in the presentation. But that would be public enemy number one. Public enemy number two would be I would build a community. I would get to know people, and I would actually establish a mentor. So find somebody who is further down the road than you, not the mega bestsellers of the world, but somebody who is writing in your genre or the genre that you want to write, somebody who's doing a good job with their marketing, and see if you can establish just a regular virtual coffee with them, or if they're local, because that's going to help you from a marketing perspective get clued in to what's actually working. Because I think the danger when you first start off as a self-published writer is you hear a million different things and you don't really know if it works. So talk to somebody who is having some success, and then that's going to help you figure out what marketing should look like for you. But also, another important thing, and it kind of gets overlooked with marketing, just keep writing. A lot of people will get that first book out there, and then, or they'll write that first book and they'll put all their resources into that book, but then they don't think about what comes next. And where a lot of self-published authors are really being successful today is in writing series. So when you have more books in a series or more product on a shelf, that increases your reach and that increases the chances of readers being able to find your books. So continuing to write while also building that mentorship, I think, is a really important thing that I wish I had done sooner.
Now, before we get to Matty, I just a couple of follow-up questions, Michael. I'm wondering if one of the mistakes you referenced sounded like you were writing in a lot of different categories or genres. Am I right about that?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote everything under the sun, and I took the scenic route. So I didn't really know what I wanted to write. Like I was just like, oh, science fiction, that sounds like fun. Oh, epic fantasy, that sounds cool. And so it was a double-edged sword, because I learned about that genre and I got a sense of what worked for me and what didn't. But if I had just been able to pick a genre that I liked and that had the intersection of art and commerce, I think I could have settled down a little bit sooner, and I could have coalesced a lot more books around a common genre, which I think would have helped me build an audience faster.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people can probably relate to that, but settling down would have helped me.
So focusing on a specific genre or subgenre.
Exactly.
And then you use that term that I know writers sometimes feel is very nebulous: community. Need to build a community. Do you mean be on social media? What does that look like tangibly for you?
I think a community has two components to it. The first part is your internal network. So the people, the authors that that you talk to on a regular basis to get your information, and any communities that you might be a part of. So just to get your name out there. And then the second part, which I think comes later, which is the social media part, right? Okay. So it's really difficult to build the social media part, but you also have to have people that you can talk to get a sense, to keep your ear to the ground with what's going on out there.
Matty, what's your perspective on this? What should new authors be prioritizing?
Well, I do agree with a lot of what Michael said, the idea of establishing an online home base by getting at least getting the URL that's your author name. I think one thing that authors early in their careers sometimes do is figure they're going to set up a website for their book. And I guess that's fine if you know for a fact you're only going to write one book. But I think the general advice is own the property that is your name on the web. And even if it's just like a one-page landing page, that's good. You've secured that space. You'll have a place where people can go that, maybe before your book even comes out, they can find you on there and maybe learn a little bit about you. I would say establishing an email list. So even if establish an email list is one of those pieces of advice that has not changed in the 11 years since I've been publishing. It's sort of like the one true thing that continues being the first recommendation, which is you not only want to own your place on the web, but you also want to own your way to communicate with the people who become your followers. And early on, your followers are going to be like your ex-roommate and your next door neighbor. You're not going to start out big, but you might as well set that up, and you might as well start communicating with those people in a way, as I like to say, whether you have an audience of 10 or an audience of 10,000, communicate with the same sense of professionalism that you want to convey as part of your author brand. I think in terms of developing a community, there are many, many ways that community can manifest itself for authors. I myself am relying less on social media for my fiction work these days, whereas it was possible to have a lot of success with, let's say, Facebook ads. I know we're going to talk about that later, but that social media seemed to be a much more vibrant way for authors to support their financial goals. I am not experiencing that anymore, and I'm hearing that from a lot of other authors too, but I still think it's a great community building platform. And I think the same advice applies as for email lists. You set up a page on Facebook, let's say, rather than a profile, or you set up your public facing persona on the other platforms that may be separate from your friends and family persona, and start engaging with people on the topics that your work is going to be about. So if you're writing fiction, start engaging with people about what's their favorite epic fantasy book. If you're writing about nonfiction, engage with people about what's their favorite, what are their favorite writing tips or whatever that might be. And you'll be able to not only build a great community, but you can also get a lot of great information from those kinds of interactions. So those would be my first pieces of advice for people who are just publishing their first book. And I will also second Michael's comment that people told me this when I wrote my first book, and when it came out in 2013, don't spend a lot of time marketing, but of course you've written a book and you want to get it in front of as many people as possible. But I do think that the advice that I always give, and I never expect actually to be followed, is invest your time in the next book, not in trying to spread the word about your first book.
Yeah. I have so many follow-up questions about the email specifically, but I know we're going to get to it later, so I'm going to hold off for now. I'm going to go to the next question, which is about timelines and how much work you would put into this, what we're discussing, if your first book isn't going to be out for a year or two. And also, would your advice differ depending on what it is you're writing? Like, would novelists perhaps approach this differently than nonfiction authors? So Michael, again, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'll answer it for fiction, and then I'll answer it for nonfiction. For fiction, I am just a big believer in getting the book out there. A book has a very long lifetime, a lifetime that is measured by copyright, and it's so long that it's honestly hard to wrap your head around. Here in the United States, you own a copyright to a book for your life plus 70 years, right? So whether you publish the book on Tuesday or whether you publish it on next Tuesday, kind of irrelevant, right? Now, you don't want to publish a book, when the biggest seller in your genre is publishing, if you can help it. But generally speaking, you have a very long runway. So I encourage people to think less about the timeline and more about the practicality of getting the steps right. So take your time, get the cover that needs to be gotten for the book in terms of getting that right. Take your time with the editing, make sure that the book is as best as it can be. Make sure that, from a formatting perspective, it's formatted properly. Get it in front of beta readers if you want to do that. Take your time with that first book, because you're never going to spend more time, generally speaking, publishing a book than you will with your first book. So just get the book out there, learn the lessons that you need to learn, and then apply those to the next book. And, as we talked about with the marketing, generally with more books, you have the opportunity to reach more readers. All right. So with fiction, and there's some authors in the self-published space who will write an entire series before they publish the first book. That takes a lot of guts. That takes a lot of patience to be able to write that many books and then publish. That works for some people. Other people, that drives them crazy to even think about that. So it really, it's a personality thing from a timeline perspective. If you're not going to have a book for 1 to 2 years, that's okay. I would still recommend doing everything that Matty just talked about, which is creating that website, getting to know people, creating that newsletter, because there's going to be a lot of opportunities that you can go chase, like paid advertising, building your newsletter, all of that. But there's going to be a lot of opportunities that can come from within your network as well, which is why I recommend getting a mentor. So that's fiction. Now, nonfiction, it's a little different in that, generally speaking, when people start a nonfiction career, there usually only is one book, or there's going to be maybe just a few books that they're going to be working on. So nonfiction authors, I really recommend that they lean a lot more into the networking side of things, because that's where a lot of opportunities will not only come from the book, but they could come from speaking, right? So maybe you know somebody who knows somebody that has a slot on a podcast and needs to interview somebody about your particular topic, right? And with nonfiction also, I also encourage nonfiction authors to lean a little bit more heavily into social media, because that becomes an engine for how people discover your books. So if you're an expert on XYZ topic, well, maybe start a YouTube channel about that particular topic where you talk about it every week. Or maybe start a TikTok channel, or whatever that looks like, a podcast. There's all sorts of different avenues. But nonfiction authors, I think, have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to social media, because you've got something that you can talk about that's not just buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. Whereas fiction writers, it's a little bit harder with social media to engage on that. So that's what I would recommend from a fiction versus nonfiction breakdown.
Matty, what's your perspective?
Well, I think that one of the real strengths of indie publishing is that it's not as time bound as what I've seen in the trad world. And Jane, you can weigh in on this as well if you feel like you have a different perspective. But in the trad world, what I see is that a book comes out, there's a huge spike of effort and publicity and activity around it. And a year later, you're really not hearing about that on social media or, in interviews or anything like that. For the indie author, it's very much different. So I am still promoting my first book, which came out 11 years ago, more heavily than any other fiction book, because my hope is that people will read that first book in that series and they will read through, and that will be good for me and for the readers. And so I don't think that there is this same sense of you have to have a huge push on the launch. And then if you haven't done it in 6 months, you've lost your opportunity. That has not been my experience at all. My activity in support of both my fiction and nonfiction is much more sort of steady state than big spikes. And I think from the point of view of how I interact with people on both those platforms, or for each of those platforms, I see that my interactions on social media related to my fiction work is much more relationship building focused. So posting pictures, a lot of pictures of my dogs, because people love pictures of my dogs. I love posting pictures of my dogs. For the nonfiction platform, much more information sharing. So for the Indy Author podcast, I have an episode each week, and each day of that week, I post a brief clip from the interview for people to see across all platforms. The My focus is much more specific in fiction, I have to say, than in nonfiction. So I've tried out lots of social media platforms. I just like Facebook. I just don't like the other social media platforms. And I finally just said, look, if I'm not enjoying it, it's not doing me any good. And it's probably telegraphing to my followers that I'm not enjoying it either. So for fiction, I very much focus on Facebook because it's something I enjoy, and also a platform I believe my target demographic is hanging out on. For my nonfiction platform, I use social media posting tools to get all those 1-minute clips out onto the various platforms. And I don't have any expectation that I'm necessarily going to be interacting with people except on Facebook. My the information I'm sharing is much less structured for my fiction than it is for my nonfiction. Kind of back to what Michael said, that if you're writing nonfiction, you have kind of an automatic topic to talk about, and that's the topic of your book. And then The other real strong thing I see in terms of community building is, to what extent am I relying on other people to help spread the word about my work? So for my fiction work, I do cross promotions. I do, Jane, you've talked about literary citizenship. I try to be a good literary citizen by sharing the works of other fiction authors, and they do the same for me. But I'm relying on myself much more. Whereas on my nonfiction platform, especially because it often involves other people, either people I'm interviewing for my podcast or people I'm co-authoring with, Michael, for example, we have a book coming out, then
We
I'm
do.
really relying on other people to help spread the word about my nonfiction platform as well. So those are some of the commonalities and some of the differences in my own experience.
Terrific. So let's get into some of the more specific elements that we've already touched on, starting with author websites. There's obviously many options for the technology supporting that, and Authors Guild has its own website building option. There's WordPress, Squarespace, Ghost. I'd like to sidestep the tech discussion for the moment, unless you have strong feelings, mention them, of course, and focus on what the website needs to accomplish. So, what do authors need to get right? And is there anything in this area that you feel like isn't getting sufficient care or attention from, and especially from self-published authors? And Maddie, we'll start with you.
Well, this was a question that I appreciated having an opportunity to think about, because I'm just in the process of, this is my only tech reference I'll make, is that I built both my platforms on Weebly, and Square, which now owns Weebly, is not committing to continue support of Weebly after the middle of next year. So I'm in the process of thinking through moving my websites to another platform. I think the only tech consideration I would recommend to people is to make sure you're on a platform that you can update yourself, that you're not having to go through someone else. Whether or not you have someone help you create your website, that's a different conversation. But be sure you can make the updates yourself. And now there are plenty of tools that make that very easy. So I don't think that's like a large hurdle to clear. Um, as I said, I think it's important to get your domain name, your author name. If you already have a clear sense of a brand, like the Indy Author, for example, I do have both Matty Dalrymple for my fiction work and the Indy Author for my nonfiction work. If you know you're going to have a brand like that, maybe, but definitely get your author name URL. Um, and just start out very basic. I mean, I think that's going to be kind of my theme through this whole conversation is start out basic, but make sure that what you put out there is professional and accurate. So start basic with a website with a page for your book, a page for contact information, um, page for bio, maybe even an event page media kit that might include a headshot or something like that. I think that's pretty much what you need for your first book. Um, but make sure that the information you have out there is up to date. So as someone who interviews authors frequently, there's nothing that puts me off more than going to like an author's event page and it says upcoming events and the top event is from last year or something like that. If you're going to put it up there, then make sure that the information is accurate, make sure it's uh, professionally presented. And if you establish that level of professionalism to begin with, then you'll get a lot more impact if someone goes to a one-page professional looking and carefully maintained page than page after page of material that perhaps no one ever even sees. So start simple, but start elegantly would be my advice there.
Terrific. Michael?
Yeah, everything Maddie said is spot on in terms of keeping it basic. And really how I've liked to think about it is that, how do I get the reader to the right place at the right time? So when people come to your website, there's really only two questions that you need to answer. The first is, what's the newest book you have out and what are the choices that are available to you? And then, who are you? Like, what do they want to know about you? And I think if you can answer those two questions, then, naturally, if you answer the question of what's the newest book you've got out, well, where do they buy it? All right. And how do you let them know where they can find it? So there are certain places like where you can create universal book links, like through Draft to Digital's Books to Read. Books to Read. You can create a universal link, so you can create that link. Readers click on it, and then it pops up all the different places where your book can be found. All right. So where can they find it? That to me is is huge, because sometimes you don't always know where to find the book. I've gone to authors' websites and I thought, okay, well, do they have something on Google Play? Well, I don't know, because all I see is Amazon links. But so just be careful about that. You don't want to put a million links on your page, but what are the major retailers, right? Amazon, Google, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, right? So make sure if you're going to distribute your book widely, we won't talk about being exclusive to Amazon, but if you distribute your book widely, make sure that the readers know where they can find it. And I think that's just absolutely critical. And, just also having a contact form on your page, I think, is important as well. So that if readers want to tell you how much they loved your book, let them reach out to you. And also, if there's an opportunity, for example, within your network, or if somebody says, hey, this book is perfect, I'd love to feature it on my blog, how do they get in touch with you? So a contact form, I think I would add as an important page to the list of things that Matty mentioned.
Yeah. I'm surprised at how every type of author often will not do much in the way of retailer links or being very explicit about what formats are available. And yeah, it's just surprising to me, especially if you're trying to sell books, that you wouldn't be more exhaustive. But I recognize it's boring work to do.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's one of those things. Nobody wants to get out of bed in the morning and create different links for all of your books. But that's how you make money. That's you think about it like this: you take 30 minutes to split out all your links. You've got the ebook links, you've got your links to all the different retailers, and then you don't have to do it again. It's
Right.
like a one and done sort of thing.
Okay, let's move on to newsletters. So there's so many different questions to tackle here, but I think let's agree that the email newsletter list is essential, especially for self-publishing authors. I don't think either of you are going to say no. I think the main challenge people have is how do they grow the list, and what do you put in this newsletter? Is it overtly promotional, buy my book? Does it have editorial content? Is it both? And some basic principles to get started. And then I also have a follow-up question, but I'm going to hold it back so that I don't overwhelm you. Michael, you first.
Okay, so newsletters is a big universe. Yes, you should have newsletters. There's always the next question of, well, how do you grow it? And the answer is you grow it any way you can without being silly about it. So I would not go out and purchase or do huge swaps of newsletters with other services where you don't know who these people are. Sometimes every once in a while you see somebody that will do like a Kindle giveaway in order to get a bunch of newsletter people. That's not the way to grow a list, because people are only there for the Kindle. They're only there for the giveaways, right? The best way to grow a newsletter is to put a link to your newsletter at the back of your book, as well as somewhere on preferably the homepage of your website. And as you sell books organically, you will get people who read your book all the way through, like it, click through, sign up for your list. That is the best way to do it. Certainly, you could do cross promotional opportunities, like, if Matty and I were writing in the same genre, Matty could share my book to her audience and I could do vice versa. That's another great way to promote your books as well, because then that gives you something to talk about, right? So when you email your list, you're not always saying, hey, buy my book, buy my book. You can say, hey, here's another book that I really like, buy that. So that's a great way. There's tools like BookFunnel that offer newsletter swaps, so you could look that up as well. You could find similar authors in your genre and agree to swap books. But really, the meat of growing a newsletter comes from the organic back of the book. So as you find ways to sell more books, your newsletter will eventually grow. Now, what do you email your people when you've got them on the list, right? So what I like to do, I like to email my newsletter once a month. And that's the contract that I have with my folks. And so on the fiction side, I will find something to talk about, either about myself, although I don't like to do that a whole lot, just because I feel like it's overly, absorbed, that sort of thing. I guess I'm weird about that, but I will talk about things that are going on in my writing life, upcoming books. I will, every once in a while, if I have an anniversary. So I just had a series where it's a 5-year anniversary. So I did a happy birthday, thing, and I did a sale. I did a 99-cent sale on book 1 in that series. Okay. So just find different ways to get creative about getting your books in front of people, I think is key. Any helpful information you can share. So from a nonfiction perspective, maybe you find a really cool article that you can send people to, or maybe you have a social media post that you want people to read. And you can make the newsletter focus about that. All right. So just another thing, and I'll stop because there's a million things we could do, is just making sure when you write your newsletters in a very personal way. Some people use the stilted "Dear Reader," and they write lots of paragraphs, really long newsletters. Don't do that because people are just scanning their emails. So using lots of white space, very short paragraphs, short to medium long sentences, keep them reading down the page because most people are scanning their emails. So if you write your emails like that, sign up for newsletters for other authors, see what they're doing, and imitate that, and that will help you get into your voice, and that'll help you also figure out things to say.
Terrific. Matty?
Well, my fiction and nonfiction newsletters are very different. So I've never had any trouble with my nonfiction newsletter. I have a weekly podcast episode, and every week after the episode goes up, the subscribers to my newsletter get a summary of the podcast, a link to the interview on YouTube. They always get a recommended resource separate from what we've talked about on the podcast. So that's very easy to put together because I know for a fact that the people who are subscribing to my newsletter are going to be interested in these things that I can just pull very easily from my podcast. If you don't have a podcast, I think you can do the same thing with the book. If you're building an audience of people who love fly fishing in Montana, then share stories about best practices for fly fishing in Montana. And that's something that's also very easy to bring a personal perspective to because you share pictures of you fly fishing in Montana, or you share, stories of meeting a fellow fisherman. So I think that, as Michael is saying, the more personal you can make it, the better. On my fiction front, I have to say I've struggled with this, Jane, as you know, because I don't enjoy, I enjoy nonfiction newsletters as a subscriber, but I do not really subscribe to or enjoy newsletters from fiction authors, because even for the fiction authors I love the most, basically what I want to know is when is their next book coming out and where are they going to be for author events. And so I've experimented with trying to do something else for my subscribers. And as with social media, you'll hear another theme here. If I'm not enjoying it, I really think that at some point, there's some things you have to just force yourself to do, but at some point you get to say, I'm really hating this. I'm just not going to try to do the weekly fiction email anymore. And so I do pretty much notify my subscribers on the fiction front when I have a new book, a author event coming up, or a sale on one of my books. But the other thing I've done that has been really fun to increase my newsletter subscriber list on the fiction side is that I have this thing called Maddie's Book Rehoming Project. And it came about because I was trying to clear my bookshelf of some books so I could make room for new books. And I was sort of debating about what to do about it. And so I put up a post on my various social media platforms and said, if you're interested in this book, let me know. And next month, I'm going to pull a name. And if you're based in the US, I will mail you this book. And that has gotten really popular. And I've gotten a number of new subscribers from that. It is a more community building kind of effort. And it's doing me a favor because it's clearing my bookshelf. It's, fun to sometimes somebody who's received a book will post something on my social media and say, oh, here's the book that I got from Maddie with a picture. And so that's been fun. And I've enjoyed that a lot. And another idea I got from a conversation I recently had on my podcast with Ross Morris, another fellow ALLi colleague, is doing something fun like writing a drabble for each book. So a drabble is a story that's exactly 100 words. And my new commitment for my fiction platform is that I'm going to write a month appropriate drabble, which I think would be a fun thing for readers to come back to and look forward to. And it's not going to take very much of their time by definition, but just is another opportunity to inject more of that personal aspect that I think is so important in newsletters.
Yeah, with fiction authors, I agree. It can be a little bit tougher for people to come up with ideas for what is it that you're going to put in there. I do notice that a community focus or approach, like you mentioned, Maddie, can be very effective. I did put into the chat, I think Johnny will share these, 2 examples for people if they want to check them out. Meg Medina is a children's author who I think has a very strong newsletter. I want to say it's monthly or every other month. And then Leslie Penelope is a very strong, both self-published and traditionally published author with, I think, at least 2 newsletters, one for people who are looking for writing advice and then another who follow her novels. So that would be another option to see what they're doing. But the literary citizenship approach, I think, is often recommended in for novelists in particular. Okay, so just quickly, like 1-minute answer. Substack, yes, no, or for what purpose? Michael.
If you've got something to say, I'd say go for it. If it suits your personality, great. I would not start a Substack just to start a Substack because people are saying it's hot.
Maddie?
Yeah, I would say if the opposite of going to a place like Substack is blogging on your own website, then I would say that probably works better for authors who are already established, who already have a following, and people are willing to go to their website to find that information. But otherwise, I think finding some kind of other platform that hosts that kind of material is good because people will recognize the name. There may be opportunities for monetizing it and so on. So again, I'm not a big blogger myself, but I think the challenge there is that the players do seem to change quite frequently. So just be prepared, I suppose, to move your home base if you need to, if the platform you've chosen proves not to be appropriate for you anymore.
Yeah, even though Substack started more strongly, I guess, as a newsletter tool, I feel like as of today, it has more qualities of blogging in my experience, and it has that social media network. So if you're of a blogging mindset, it feels like, yes, by all means go there. But if to send an email newsletter, I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense. I'll put a link into the chat if people want more of my perspective on like both the great aspects and the terrible aspects of Substack, for reasons that Maddie touched on. Okay, so social media. This is such a confusing area because it's so fragmented now. And you just have kind of slivers of communities in all these different places. And so I'm going to start with a bold question, and then you can riff on it as you wish. Can you have an effective online presence without using much social media at all? Do you consider it advisable? And we will start with Maddie on that.
I think that it's important to probably have one outlet that you can reach people in an interactive way. So one of the reasons that I have enjoyed Facebook as opposed to, let's say, a newsletter is I can post something and I can get immediate feedback. And sometimes it's goofy feedback, like that's a cute picture of your dog. And sometimes it's really useful feedback, like here are 2 possible cover redesigns. Which one do you like the best? But I think that interactivity has to work both ways. I think it only makes sense to be on a platform that you are willing to be on a lot. And that usually means that you enjoy being on it, which is why I no longer do pretty much anything other than Facebook. I think that depth is more important than breadth. People might want to go to the various social media sites and get their name just to hold it. Although I think that oftentimes those things expire if you're not being active on the platform. But I think that the 2 pieces of information that I would share with regard to social media is consider not only what you like, but also what is appropriate for the demographic that you're trying to reach. And that's easy to find. Just go on Google or whatever and ask for information about what social media platforms apply to what or appeal to which contingents. And then the other thing that I advise is be pretty brutal about curating your feed. And I'd say this personally and professionally, because I talk with so many people who say, oh, I used to really enjoy being on such and such platform, but then this guy I used to go to high school with started posting something that I found offensive, and now I get mad every time I go on there. And I say, well, did you block him? And they say, well, no. And I just think that social media can be a very pleasant place if you're pretty diligent about curating the content. I certainly do this on my own social media feeds, my personal social media feeds. But I also think it's super important to do it in your professional feeds as well, because you want to create a community that is welcoming to the people that you want to invite into it. And I remember early on sort of debating about, there was a comment that was sort of like, could be interpreted as being kind of offensive. And I debated about it for a couple of minutes and I thought, no, this is not the kind of thing I want people who come to my social media platform to find. And so I think finding something you like and then being willing to curate it are two important parts of building an effective social media outreach campaign.
Amen to the muting and the blocking.
Yes.
Michael?
Yeah, I'll answer it for fiction and nonfiction. So to your bold question, Jane, can you succeed, or can you have an online presence without social media? I think for fiction, I think the answer is yes. I think there are a lot of fiction writers that rely solely on their list and paid advertising to be successful. And social media is by no means a requirement. It can certainly pour gasoline on what you're doing, and it can certainly help you build the community and get the results, but it's not, I wouldn't say, required. For nonfiction, it's a lot harder. I think for nonfiction, it's harder to succeed without building that community on social media. Just because so much of your sales and your interaction is going to come from interacting with people, and so it's not just enough to have the book. You also want to be an expert in your topic, and being an expert means you've got to get out there and get to know people, and show that you're available and all those sorts of things. So what I encourage people to do to think about social media is to pick the medium that suits your personality. There are going to be some people watching this who, oh my God, I will never get on YouTube. I will never get behind a microphone. They just want to be behind a blog. They want to write a blog or write a regular newsletter. And that suits their personality. If that's you, then just double down. Find the Substack or start your own blog, whatever that looks like, because you want to find the medium that makes your personality shine through to readers. Now, there are some people like me. I actually like being behind a camera because I find that is where I am pretty effective. And that works for me. That doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me. So I have a YouTube channel. I've been pretty successful. I like to do speaking. And so that's a skill that I have where I know I can reach people. So that works for me. There are other people like Matty. Matty has a great podcast presence. Like that fits her personality like a glove. So find out what that is and then do that. And then ignore all the other chatter around other things. So, there'd be people that say, well, TikTok sells books. Yes, it does. But if you're not a TikToker, if you don't get out of bed in the morning and you're not excited about TikTok, then nothing you create on TikTok is going to really attract followers because it's going to look like you're going through the motions. And so I just encourage everybody, if you haven't found the social media network that you like, maybe just keep looking around. Maybe the social media network that works for you hasn't been invented yet. That's always possible too. So just think about it like that, and I think you'll be successful.
All right. So here's the last planned question, and then we're going to go to audience Q&A. I want to talk a little bit about harnessing platform to launch a book. And, we've talked about some of the different pieces. So how do they come together when you're planning a book launch? How do you use these things to generate sales, generate reviews over the long term? I realize that's a big question that books have been written on, but I'm essentially looking for what are you thinking about in terms of how you use these assets and then putting them into place in, let's say, the 3 months prior or 3 months after the book releases. And we'll start with Michael.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief, but just think about every element of your platform. Think about your platform in general as an ecosystem. Every element has its part to play. And so when you have a book launch, you just run the book through the ecosystem. So let's say I've got a book launch coming up in 3 months, right? I'm going to let my newsletter know about it. I'm going to get advanced reader copies in front of people. I might talk about it a little bit on social media. If I happen to do any sort of podcast interviews, I might mention it. And I'm going to put a page on my site, probably on the homepage, letting people know that I've got a book coming out. Right. And then closer to the launch, I'm going to start using my newsletter to promote the book so that the newsletter pushes people toward the book on launch day. Right. And then another element of newsletters we didn't talk about is autoresponders. So I'm going to put this book in an autoresponder sequence so that when people sign up for my newsletter, there's a series of automated emails that go out that get people familiar with my book. I'm going to send them the new, let them know about the newest book so that I can continue to promote that book long after launch day. It just becomes an organic part of the onboarding process. And then there's the social media once you've got the book done, and there's paid advertising, which we'll talk about next week. But every element of your platform has a part to play. And when you're starting off, a lot of times you're going to be talking to yourself. You're going to be talking to a wall, and that's okay. Just still go about it as if, as Matty mentioned, if you've got 100 people or if you've got 100,000 people, just focus on getting the fundamentals right and understand how your ecosystem works so that as you get more people, you can just simply do the same things and just scale it.
Matty, how do you approach this?
Well, my first piece of advice that I follow myself is don't try to do it all. And so you can go to those books that are about book launches and they'll give you the 250 things that you can do to support a book launch. And everyone should look at those as like a menu in a restaurant. You just don't go into the restaurant and say, yes, I'll have all the entrees. No, you pick the ones you want. And so I think that those lists are great for ideas, but not as a checklist. And so pick the things that, as Michael is saying, are supportable with the platform that you've developed over the time leading up to your launch. And I would just go back also to the fact that I don't believe that it's really time bound. I mean, I have 10 novels, I have a novella, I have 2 nonfiction books. We have a new nonfiction book coming out, Michael and I do, on becoming an author speaker. And if I even went through my curated list of things that I wanted to do, and I felt that I had to do them within the time leading up to and the immediate time following the launch date, I would probably go crazy. And especially for my fiction, well, I think for both, I feel comfortable falling back on the fact that I can promote these anytime. And so if I miss some items in my launch plan for a book that's coming out that's set in September, then I don't really sweat it because every September I'm going to have a little mini promotional campaign that says, hey, you want a book that's set in September? Here's an option for you. And so I think that fact that the indie author has this option of caring for their backlist much longer than I think is true in traditional publishers takes some of that pressure off to do anything in that tiny window of time. And knowing that you can always loop back and your book is always going to be new to someone and it's always going to be fresh when you present it to a certain audience can make doing those things that you've chosen from the giant list of possibilities more manageable.
Well, I think that's a great note to end our formal conversation on because I think it's such an advantage for the self-publishing author, especially when I think about traditionally published authors who do feel like there is an immense pressure to get this right in the first 3 months. And then after that, they lose all, support, and they can't get the strength out of the traditional book launch because booksellers and librarians and all the rest of the people have moved on to the new season. So I'm glad that you emphasize that. Okay, so I think Johnny may be coming back about now to help us with some Q&A, or I don't know, maybe I'm supposed to pick the questions. I can do that too. I'm going to look at what has the most upvotes. Okay. Book trailers on YouTube. Someone joining us today actually has a book trailer that received a lot of traction. Would you recommend more? This is not an area I have much experience with. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, this has been around since I started in 2014, and some people have done it and seen some success. Generally speaking, I have not seen a whole lot of authors see a lot of success with it. So if you've got that, flaunt it, use it to your advantage. I think your time could be better spent elsewhere unless you've got the ability, you've got that audio visual background to be able to create something that's compelling. I'm just not convinced, me personally, anecdotally, that readers buy from book trailers. But with AI and a lot of the technologies coming out, maybe it would be easier to create that. But I think your time is probably better spent doing the tried and true fundamentals.
Matty?
Yeah, I have I've hired people to do book trailers for me. I don't know that I can say that I really felt like the data I saw coming back justified the money I'd spent on that. I've also created some book trailers myself just because I thought it would be fun. And I don't do it on the theory of like assigning an hourly rate to my time. I'm kind of doing it. It's like a fun evening activity.
Yeah.
The one area that I would like to be more active in book trailers is for audiobooks, because I do think that there's this power of letting the letting your social media audience or your newsletter followers or what have you hear the book. Like everybody can click to a retail platform and listen to the audio sample. I don't know that many people do that, but if you can give them a trailer that gives them a sample, not only of the content, but of the narrator, I think that that's especially powerful, especially if you're using a human narrator, because that's, you're going to get bonus points for not relying on AI for that. And so I am looking more into trying to create some short and ideally inexpensive trailers to support my audiobook launches.
I have bought exactly one book because of a YouTube video I saw, and it was not labeled as a book trailer. It was simply a really quick 5-minute lesson that I found so enlightening and valuable. And it mentioned the book at the end that I bought the book. And especially for this was a nonfiction book. I have to imagine for nonfiction people, so I would maybe don't think about this as book trailers because it sounds like heavily promotional. Instead, think about what are some like really helpful tips or things drawn from the book that I can post about, whether it's on YouTube or somewhere else, because that will drive book sales if people really like what was in the video. Okay. The other really upvoted question, this is from Crystal. As a fiction writer, she wonders, what about posting about things you're researching? For example, having a Substack all about space tech, 1800s fashion. You're doing the research for the book anyway. So, Matty?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think if you can give people glimpses into the creative process and also share that kind of information, then you're kind of automatically reaching out to the audience you want to reach. Because if somebody's writing about how they researched space fantasy, it's going to appeal to the right people. So I think that's a great idea.
I agree.
Johnny, are there any questions you want to pull to the front or you think we should tackle next?
Well, there's a few about email content. Is there certain content to send out at certain times, like months before, during pre-orders, good content that works after a book has come out? Do you have any good tips in that arena? I think a lot of fiction writers, especially, are just not sure what to put unless it's an excerpt.
Yeah, I can answer from a fiction perspective. The answer I would give for fiction is if you have nothing to say, just don't say anything till you have a new book. And that's probably the right thing, but you have to be careful with that, because if you go too long without readers having heard from you, then they're going to like, who is this person? I don't want to be on this list. So you kind of have to strike a balance. I like to I don't promote my books every time I send things to readers. Sometimes I might do something about research, like I'm researching this book, or sometimes I might share another person in my genre who my readers might enjoy. Other times I might share a Kickstarter that I like, or a blog post that I wrote, or, just try to be as creative as you can. And then, at the end say, hey, by the way, if you're interested, I've got this book that, you can share with them. But yeah, fiction is a little harder with this. And that's why I always go back to joining other successful self-published fiction authors lists in your genre, because you can see what they're doing and that will give you some ideas about what's working and what's not.
I think that idea of cross promotion is really important. On the fiction side is something I'd really underutilized, and I recently joined a cross promotion for thriller novels. And the agreement was every month you would feature one of the other people in this promo in your newsletter. And I was very uncomfortable with it at first because I was not going to be able to read all 12 of the other people's novels that I had a responsibility to share. But when I did it, I got a really positive response from the newsletter recipients. And I wasn't pretending that I read something that I hadn't. In a couple of cases, I'd had an opportunity to actually interview the authors. So I was able to add a sort of personal perspective that wasn't necessarily my review of the book. But yeah, I think that idea of sharing what you've enjoyed is a great starting point for finding content for a newsletter.
And can I say something else?
Yes,
Oh,
go ahead.
because I bet there are people who are thinking, oh my, but that's intimidating to reach out to other authors to ask them to share your book. Something that you could do is you could offer to share another author's book, and you'll find that it's a lot easier to reciprocate that way. It's better to reach out to somebody and say, hey, I read your book, I loved it, I'd love to share it with my audience. And that's a way better way to start a conversation than, hey, would you be willing to share my book? So for all those introverts out there, that could be one way to get around that fear.
I did want to share just a piece of tactical information related to what to do around a book launch. I do think there are at least like 4 or 5 emails you definitely want to send when you have a new book coming out, regardless of how you publish. You're probably going to do something around the cover reveal, or when the title takes shape, or you definitely have a release date. Some of those details are firmed up and you can start getting people excited or marking their calendar. The pre-order day, if you have one, the day the book is available to pre-order, the launch day. And then after that, when you hit the New York Times bestseller list, or you have some really juicy review, or the good news message. And of course, you can have many of those included in emails after that launch date.
Thank you. A few people asked about a universal link to put everywhere. I think Linktree is the main answer, but is there some other solution for that sort of thing?
I wonder if they're
Yes.
asking about also a universal book sales link as well.
Right, right.
Well, Michael had mentioned earlier about
Yeah.
books to read. Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll put them in the chat so you can share them, Johnny. There are 2 that I can think of off the top of my head. Books to Read, which is a free service. You just take a link of your book from Amazon or Google or wherever, and then it'll go off and find your book on all the different retailers. And then when the reader clicks on that one link, a little window pops up and it has all the logos to where they can purchase the book. And that's all done automatically. That's free. Another service that a lot of people like is Genius Link. And that gives you a little bit more customizable ability. And you can send readers to one link, and then you can direct them to different places depending on their device and their reading preferences and things like that.
And a few people asked about LinkedIn, which I think is sometimes mentioned as a pretty good option for nonfiction authors, especially if your topic relates in some way to people's careers. Do you have any thoughts on that? I assume you don't use LinkedIn, Matty and Michael.
I actually do. I use it quite heavily for my nonfiction material because the people that I want to reach with information about writing tips or publication tips or professional tips and so on, that is the group I want to reach, especially if you have something associated with a book like a consulting service. I have consulting services related to people helping think through their publishing strategy, and all my demographic who are coming up on retirement are probably sitting around thinking about the books they might want to write or publish. And so that's definitely a group I want to reach. I don't spend a lot of time like hanging out there, but I definitely share information about the things I have to offer, primarily on my nonfiction side.
Yeah, I don't use LinkedIn a lot, but LinkedIn video is something that's always been pretty appealing to me. Videos on LinkedIn, because you just don't see it that often. I think that's another way to be visible on that platform.
Yeah, there is like an active writing and publishing industry community there. And when I left X or Twitter some time ago, it became my #1 place of social engagement, not by intention. It was almost by accident. I was like, wow, a lot of people are here and following me. And so if you haven't dusted off your LinkedIn profile in a while, I would suggest doing so and testing the waters.
All right, well, as we wrap up the end of the hour, maybe we should discuss briefly what we'll be talking about next week. Ads, campaigns.
Yes. Give me just a second to bring up those questions. Hold on, because I know I have a description. Yes. So next week, we're going to be talking about, now that you have your platform, hopefully, even if it's small, of reaching potential readers, how do you convert those to sales? So we're going to talk about how you do that hard marketing for self-published books, ranging from ads, other paid placements, some more complex things like swag, giveaway strategies, influencer outreach. We touched on ARCs a little bit. We'll get more into that next week. Promotional book boxes. So I hope you'll all join us again for that.
Wonderful. And also to those who asked, yes, I will round up the links we've shared and all that, and I'll send a follow-up email to everyone who registered, so you can easily access that information. This has been wonderful. Jane, Michael Ronn, Matty Dalrymple, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to next week's event as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.